Good morning to our audience. I am excited to welcome and introduce Tracy Paul. He is the founder of Cornerstone Advertising, and I'm excited to introduce him to contractors who may not have heard of one of the most experienced advertising agencies that has specialized in contractor advertising for more than 25 years, if you can believe it. And today I've asked him to share his experience and insight into how contractors in particular use mass media to grow their companies. And Tracy, I just want to kind of thank you for taking the time to share really 25 years of contractor advertising experience with our audience.
Well, you bet, Mike. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Well, listen, let's get into it. I know many of our listeners have heard of stochastic marketing from these podcasts, but the Cornerstone, which is the company you founded years ago, they've been working behind the scenes for many, often very large contractors, and some of whom were rolled up in maybe some of the industry's largest ownership groups. So a lot of our listeners may not realize that your work and their market is affecting their existing operations right now. How'd you get into this industry?
Sure. Very similar, Mike, to most of our contractors got into the industry, and many of them were, really good technicians that went out on their own, and I was in very much the same spot. I was a hell of a visual designer back in my 20s, worked my way into a marketing position, and then had the opportunity to purchase the company I was working for. It just so happened that my first client, again, back in my 20s, I am not 20 years old today, and that was a heating and air conditioning contractor out of Indianapolis.
And then that contractor, you went through that whole roll-up and consolidation and the unwinding of the consolidation for a period, kind of like the wave we're going through right now with roll-ups, didn't you?
You bet. And boy, what an awesome opportunity, both for me in terms of my career, the company, etc., because that first client was Dial One Hoosier, located in Indianapolis, and was purchased by Blue Dot, which was one of the first consolidators, along with ARS back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it allowed us to understand, from a local market perspective, and then to layer that in with the national best practices. And so we were able to see and understand various sales cultures, various company cultures, what is capable, and then bring it to, the local level, and also have those kinds of national, both best practices as well as, resources and tools, whether that be research or otherwise. It broadened our perspective, from simply working from a local basis to having that kind of national experience.
I think you're pretty humble there. I mean, you and your team have a really good feel, when you talk about best practices, you have a really good feel for how to use stochastics data model when laying out a marketing plan, taking our best practices, and we've got a lot of mutual clients, and pretty much all of our listeners have a website. Most of Stochastics customers use direct mail, but a lot of them aren't large enough to really do radio or television, say, the right way. A lot of them may feel the effects of some of your large customers' radio or TV advertising if they're in the right markets. How do contractors decide if mass media advertising is right for them?
Boy, there are 2 or 3 deciding factors. First, it's the size of the company and the goals of the company. A $3 million contractor has a very different ad plan than a $5 million or 10 or even a $75 million contractor. Each of those ad plans to deliver a combination of both brand and, particularly lead generation. The size of the company makes a huge difference. The market itself also makes a big difference. If you keep efficiency as the guide, okay, to marketing and advertising, to say, okay, what's the most efficient way to reach? And again, one of the things I learned from you was, to reach the right customers. Various media are more efficient market to market. Some radio markets, are super saturated, and the cost per point, or cost per spot is higher in certain markets than others. So the efficiency of that media, makes a difference. So you go in, you review both the goals of the company, what are you trying to accomplish, and then the market itself. I mean, there are markets I'd love to be in radio and television, but the competition has driven the rates up so high that it becomes an inefficient medium, and so you find other ways to reach that core audience.
So that's really a market by market, decision. Then it sounds like. I know we worked with one of your large contractors. They use mass media in one of the country's most expensive media markets. When you talk about efficiency, how does a second or third tier market, say St. Louis, which we're really a second-tier city, compared to New Jersey or Houston, or maybe even a third-tier city, maybe in Evansville, Indiana. How does that differ from, the markets like Houston and Phoenix and DFW and Atlanta and Miami, where, you've got a lot of years of experience, where some of your clients are using mass media in, say, the bigger markets versus, other tiers?
That's actually a tough question, and so I'm going to start down this road. When you have large markets, so if I were to describe the difference, for media between, a small, mid, and a large market. Large markets, the cost for reach, say you were trying to reach 1% of an audience in the 45 plus, again, something that I learned from you guys, was, to adapt our audience from the standard 35 to 64 adult homeowner to that 45 plus higher earner. And how did that buying practice impact large, mid, and small? Well, take that large market. That number of 45 plus customers is still an enormous number of people. Mass media is bought by a percentage of that audience. So your barrier to entry is very high, but your cost per reach and to reach that individual tends to be a little bit lower. So it shuts out as a percentage of somebody's media buy. If you're sitting on a large market like a New York, Chicago, and LA, your barrier to entry to actually buy TV right could be $15,000 or $20,000 a month. Now, could you buy it for one or two? Sure, but you wouldn't have the impact quotient. Boy, we could take a day or so talking about the floor that you don't buy under, okay, with regards to radio and television, because it doesn't have impact quotient if you just dabble your toe in the thing. But we'll leave that for secondary conversation. The second market, a medium market, is going to have a lower floor, okay, in terms of entry. And now what you're looking at, okay, in that is, where are you as a contractor to your core audience? Okay, here's another piece, Mike, that I picked up in terms of our conversations, which is the right and the wrong audience. Okay, when we're talking about right audience, where does the right audience match up with the media itself? Okay, the reach of the radio station, the reach of the TV station. And let's say, for example, you only pick up 2 out of 15 zip codes, okay, that radio or TV station, hits in your best market. Now all of a sudden you've got 80% waste. So now you look at it from a cost perspective, because everything is money in, leads in, money out. And you say, okay, can I buy that 20% efficiently? Okay, and consider that 80% waste. The rest of the 80% of that radio or TV station's reach, can you make an efficient buy on the 20%? Certainly makes it more difficult when you have 2 zip codes out of 10 or 5 zip codes out of 25, okay, than it does to, say, a larger contractor who may have, 12 or 15 zip codes in there, super primary, primary or super primary, and the reach of the station, is, 50 zip codes. If you've got at least 50% of that, then I can tell you from a negotiating perspective, I can probably make that an efficient buy. So,
yeah, well, you and I've kicked this around for years, right? You talk about some good examples. When we look at it, we often see radio or television is for us looks like it's very wasteful because of you're not uncommon in a large metro area for contractors vans to do some business in 150 zip codes. All the money's coming from, like you said, 12 or 15. So it looks like it's very wasteful when you consider what they have to spend to get all those eyes or ears. But we've certainly seen some of your larger contractors in major markets grow with a lot of radio and TV spend and the right messaging. Even though it seems wasteful, it can generate some phenomenal results, and drive growth.
Sure. Let me give you an example. You'd brought up some of the major markets that we work in, and New York and New Jersey is one of them. When I asked my media buyer to review a large contractor that we had, in New Jersey, who was sitting on the border of the New York media market, I asked her to go ahead and take a look at the market, whether it was going to be broadcast television or, cable television, what would be more efficient. And I was surprised that where you would consider 50% waste, this contractor was sitting in New Jersey, didn't even have the licensing to work in New York City. We were buying New York television with 50% waste. We couldn't even enter the market. Never mind the dialogue about a super primary, or a tertiary market.
Right.
So it really comes down to buying. If you're approaching this on the two things, again, that I've picked up and integrated into all of our buying, which is buy the right zip codes, your super primary and primary areas, and it's the ability to negotiate against the 45 plus market. You don't go in and negotiate on a 35 plus or 35 to 64 when your primary audience is 45 plus. Keep in mind that if you 35 to 64, it means you miss your seniors. So one of the things that when you looked at invoicing, okay, Mike, and you were able to look at the amount of money that was being spent in your senior market, and we weren't even buying that before. And so that's where you can get efficient, okay, with media, is to, A, make sure that you have a percentage of the audience that matches up with the station's reach, and then you buy to the 45 plus market. If you're able to do those two things, then you can make mass media very efficient, even though you have a significant amount of waste of coverage in your other or tertiary categories outside of primary.
Well, I've always razzed you. There's buying smart and there's negotiating smart, and sometimes we know we get used like a straw horse to go. You say, well, show the station. It's great that you have all those listeners, but 50% of them are in areas we don't do much business. We don't want to pay for that. So you've been doing this long enough. You know how to negotiate with those guys. But I've always razzed you a little bit, kind of dating myself. You've got a radio voice. You sound a lot like Casey Kasem to me, right? I think I'm listening to America's Top 40 or whatever that show was before he passed away. You get a kick out of getting in the studio and cranking out a series of radio and TV spots, don't you?
Oh, you bet. And one of the things I have been doing it a long time, and I have an announcer's voice. I'm not one that has the ability to do a whole lot of character work. I hire people that are much more talented than I am. However, everybody has their quirks. And one of the quirks that I have in studio is that I'm very vocal with my hands. And so in a studio booth, with the audio engineers on one side of the glass and me on the other side of the glass, if you just took a snapshot, my hands are going all over the place. And I looked, down one day, and I noticed that all of this money, was sitting on a ledge. And I had asked the audio engineer, and I had forgotten, I take all the loose change out of my pockets so that it doesn't clink into the mic. And so it was my money. And I'd been going to this particular studio for the last 20 years, and I looked at it. He had amassed about $35 to $40 worth of my loose change, and we're going to head off and go to lunch next week on my loose change over the course of the last 20 years.
Well, like a lot of our listeners, I've never sat in on a session like that. So give us a feel for the creative process, the give and take with the contractor to put all that together.
Boy, and really think of it as the preparation for game day. Okay. So much of the work is done in scrimmage and in practice up front, going ahead and walking through, the three components, which is getting somebody's attention, getting your audience's attention. Because understand that media is interruptive. And so if you're going to interrupt somebody, you'd better get their attention. And so you get their attention, and then the next thing that's very unique about this business is that we are in a need-based business. You guys all know that. And so the idea that you wouldn't give somebody a reason to do business with you today in the form of an offer or a discount makes no sense to me. Pure branding ads seem like a waste of time, especially when you have an opportunity to speak to somebody that needs your product or service right now. And then you close that with a last mental image. One of the most important parts of the creative is, what is that branded message? Who are you, and what do you want to leave with the customer? And so that is the thing that's crafted in the form of a tagline. That's what's formed in an audio signature or those kinds of things. And so you work that creative process up front. And so by the time you're in studio, really what it is you just go and have fun. It's great to work with really talented people that can help guide and direct, whether that's the audio engineers or if you're on TV set, to be able to have a producer and a shooter and the folks that can help, lend their years of experience to that. And it just allows you to work with other talented people to pull a project like that off. But again, most of that work it's in the playbook that happens ahead of time.
Well, we're all human, and I think times there's a little bit of vanity that creeps into a contractor's decision, doesn't it? A few weeks ago, I think it was out in Vegas, you and I were at a breakfast, and a customer of ours, and worked with him for a lot of years. We were having breakfast, and he said that everybody in his market knew who he was from his local television ads. And, you and he were talking, and I was polite because, what I'd seen from his invoices, they knew who he is. They aren't calling him. How does Cornerstone evaluate the impact of sustained mass media type advertising, whether it's radio or television, cable or broadcast? How do you guys evaluate the impact?
Impact quotient is going to be based on the goals of the company. Number one, any one of the contractors can take a look at their aggregate advertising and say, I got X number of leads this year, and here's what I spent in advertising. There's a very much a bottom line component, to meeting the lead goals that will inherently help support your sales goals.
Well, you're talking about total advertising dollars spent and total number of leads. I mean, that's a simplistic way, right? What's the build, right? You've invested this money in radio.
Okay, let's go back to then evaluation. So back to your original question. When we evaluate somebody's existing television or somebody's existing media, we look at the actual impact quotient, how much you're buying in the market based on, again, I'll reach back to an earlier conversation. A certain part of mass media is intended to capture the audience that needs your product or service right now. That is a direct response component. And then over and above, you end up with a branded component. So when you build that ad budget, you're taking a look at how many phone calls you got that were directly generated from that. You can extrapolate that, knowing that there's impact quotient into other forms of media, but you're going to actually look at then what is the impact specifically of the TV or radio. Nothing gets a free ride. You can't just chalk something up and say, hey, I spend this money to have better brand awareness, and that's its sole goal. Otherwise, you have no measurement tool. And so that would be the piece I'd say, is make sure that you're measuring that and establishing a lead count associated from all of your media.
Well, the internet's been acting like a giant yellow pages more and more, and it sucks up credit for calls that really come from radio or TV or mail, for that matter. So how do you track the impact? I know, are you tracking lifts in web traffic correlated with mass media spots? I mean, we see that, Tuesday, Wednesday, when the mail hits, there's a lift in web traffic, right?
Absolutely.
And you got to, unlike most of the people out there providing advertising services to contractors, you've got this years of experience. So how do you compare what you see today with mass media and digital impact versus maybe the beginning Blue Dot days when there really wasn't a digital world, right? I mean, you had radio, TV, direct mail, and yellow pages and billboards. You didn't have all this pay-per-click stuff that you have going on now. How's that different in today's world versus 10, 15, 20 years ago?
There were actually two questions there. One happened to do with being able to measure radio and television impact, and the other one being, the change in media, right? The internet being, the yellow pages of today. Let me address some of the media piece with two tests that I've recently done. One test used a company called TV Squared. Cost several $1,000s a month, and what it did, it forced us to go ahead and put 100% of our advertising into their algorithm. They had an algorithm, a computer algorithm, that was tied to our Google Analytics that we then fed when everything hit. When did every single spot from radio and television hit? When did the direct mail hit? When did the cooperative hit? When did the other pieces of marketing and advertising actually hit the street? And then what it did is it looked at lift within against the average counts. And so we were actually able to see when a radio spot hit, when a TV spot hit. It didn't give us enough data. It wasn't accurate enough in order to be able to give us a cost per opportunity, similar to what you do with regards to direct mail. But what it did do is allow us to go ahead and understand where our direct response was coming from based on various day part buys. Was our morning news having the same impact quotient as our afternoon or evening? And it made a significant difference in how we bought the 5 to 6 a.m. news. And we actually removed that as part of our buying strategy because of the combination of what we learned from TV Squared. The other thing that we did is that we had a contractor in Atlanta who absolutely wanted to know and understand the value of placement, first, second, and third position in Google. And he was willing to go ahead and buy up to the first position 100% of the time in AdWords, and then start to buy down into second position and into third position to be able to see where his efficiency lay. And this cost over $100,000 to do that in the Atlanta market. But what it allowed us to understand was the value of branding, on the Google PPC, and two, it allowed us to understand as we're purchasing the Google AdWords, because of course position 1 is the most expensive, position 2 is second, position 3, and so on and so forth, that we were able to, with well-branded companies, we were able to buy down to about the 3.5 position point, saving an enormous amount of money buying up in the market. And we would still have roughly 90% of the lead count, which meant that we were paying 70% less for 90%. And so so do the math in that regard. And so there's your impact quotient, with regards to spending for brand, how does it impact when somebody goes to Google? And understand, AdWords are simply black and white type. There's no logo attached. There's no these kinds of things. There's no brand associated with that. So that when they see your name, a better branded company in the marketplace is going to get a higher percentage of clicks in that non-branded environment. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, when you talk about, what should it cost a contractor to acquire a lead using mass media, right?
Ooh.
Which is always a conversation that you hate to have, because people get it's the old magician's trick. I put a number in my head and then it's stuck, right? It's just a trick, and we use that use that function in our letters. But what you just talked about.
But here's what I'll tell you is the difference is that I'm willing to take a higher cost per opportunity in mail than I am in other forms of media, because it's a better lead. And so when you're able to go ahead and target down not only to age, 45 plus, income, you don't necessarily use income components. You use ability to pay components, which is sort of the next.
Yeah. There's obviously a mix of that. People that don't make any money, it's pretty unlikely that they'll have any money. So there is
some piece of that. Sure.
Yeah, there is of that. But you point to that. Not the cost traded with the leads are worth a different value, right? There's got to be
absolutely, and that's something that for years and years I always considered it as a blank slate. That hey, if it was somebody that needed my product or service, one lead was just as good as another. And when you shared with us the data from inside the contractor's own invoicing, that no, you have exponentially better opportunities to close a contractor in your super primary and primary areas. What does it mean to then formulate an ad plan around those super primary and primary areas? That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and you guys have to live in that, and we do too. I mean, we all have. I mean, anybody listening to this is an entrepreneur and has a lot of self-confidence, and they believe they can overcome objections, and their team's so good that get me in a house and I'll turn them into installs. And no matter what you show them with the numbers or we show them with the numbers, and try and ask them to take a deep breath and go, they're that good. They do. How much better would they do if I gave you better leads, right? But so oftentimes people say, just give me more leads, give me more leads, give me more leads, and I want you to spend less. Do multi-trade contractors have an easier time using mass media because maybe they're, plumbing HVAC contractors a little less weather-driven than an HVAC only? Or is it harder because I've got a brand that now I'm trying to have two messages out in the marketplace? Well, I mean, what's your experience? You've got most bigger guys. What we see in the numbers is it's really tough for a single trade contractor to operate much above $10 million a year residential. Mm-hmm. Most people that are running a business that's, say, $15 million, $20 million, $70 million, they really have 2 or 3 companies under one brand. And they're real companies. They're not like one electrician swapping out panels. They might have, 40 plumbing trucks and 70 HVAC trucks and half a dozen electrical trucks. But for multi-trade guys, is it easier or harder to use mass media?
Okay, so I'm going to introduce the concept of residual, okay? In other words, unintended consequence. Okay, of media. In other words, I stand up on the top of the mountain and I'm screaming, my name and I do this. Whether that's HVAC or plumbing, your brand, your name, okay, will then become better known within the marketplace. Okay, now, very specifically, when you're buying media versus the impact quotient oftentimes can be different. I'm going to buy based on what I'm trying to accomplish for HVAC, okay? But you and I would be kidding ourselves if we didn't think that that our name in the marketplace, even though we're buying for our HVAC numbers, doesn't impact our plumbing. Okay, so that, again, when somebody goes to Google, we're in a need-based business, they open up and they say, plumber and the marketplace, that you are not better known okay, in that list of unbranded in that unbranded environment, okay, of AdWords. So it's through the unintended, okay, or the residual impact, okay, that the alternate division, HVAC to plumbing, et cetera. We often have clients that include electrical. I got to tell you, I haven't spent a dime on electrical marketing in years, and we can bury a company in electrical because of the HVAC and plumbing, advertising that we do. Because the moment somebody's looking for an electrician, and they go online, and your name that is being so well branded as a home services company, but specifically for HVAC and plumbing, you are now a trusted name in the marketplace for that additional service.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you when we get guys saying, "What are we going to do about electrical?" I go, I'm direct marketing oriented, so I'm looking for an offer and a limited time, limited quantity event, and I don't have a way to really do that very much for electrical. And you play around with panels that need to be swapped out because of some home builder, but the electrical comes off of, like you said, residual impact, or people hear they think about you and they say, I do. Oh yeah, he does electrical. Talk a little bit about some war stories here. I mean, do you suffer with the people that are doing mass media? Does that lend itself to people who want to make crazy changes on lead volume depending on weather? Basically weekly weather forecasts. Do they have an inventory of ads and they say, hey, it's going to rain all next week and we're going to need HVAC leads, so throw money at HVAC, or it's going to be 98 degrees all next week and we're going to get all the leads we need for HVAC, so spend the money on plumbing. Is that the world you sometimes live in the bigger contractors, or is that the opposite? It's pretty planned.
No, that's absolutely the world. And when you're building bigger budgets, what you're looking at is you're saying, what are my fixed advertising expenses and what are my variable? And pay-per-click, by the way, paid Facebook, these are areas where you have variability. You can call me today and say, I got all the leads I need, go ahead and back off on PPC, and I can save you $2,000, worth of PPC spend that you can't get to. So you build in those media that you can draw down. Now, TV or radio or things, you can do some variability by budget. The problem is that variability and cost, variability costs money. So if you want to pay more, for the ability to come in and out of, and please don't kid yourself if you're out there buying media and you say, well, I can call the station and have them put my spots on anytime. If you don't think that costs you money, then you haven't negotiated them to the bone on the front end. And so variability does cost money. If you can eliminate the variability in your media buy for radio and TV and use things like pay-per-click, paid Facebook, and otherwise as your variable media, then it allows you to go into a summertime, have great messaging on mass media, and draw down your PPC so that you're never overspending against the impact of the season. Understand that media, unlike mail, is probably the thing that is the most sensitive to weather and seasonality. Do not buy, if you're in a standard market, you don't want to be buying TV in September and October, end of August, September. You don't want to be buying that the end of, in March or the beginning of April. It's too bloody expensive and you're not going to get enough back.
A good heat wave or hard freeze can make an advertising agency look like a genius.
But you can't over
60-degree weather for 6 consecutive weeks makes you look like an idiot. So sometimes you have to go, come on, man, why would I buy an air conditioner at 65 degrees?
Right. But again, you don't. Right, but again, you don't also want to be in a position where you're overspending. So you got to have the variability. You got to be tuned into what are my variable assets in marketing, so that, when you get buried, when you get the big heat wave, you're not turning off mass media, you're turning off the things like PPC, you're turning off the things like paid Facebook, those things that you can draw down quickly, but that you can then put back into the media mix quickly to have impact on the business.
Well, you bring up a good point. What kind of, in terms of committing to, the mass media and having variability in other, components, what kind of contract does a contractor have to commit to with the station or the right station or the right TV channels, assuming you've got them? You help them select. I mean, what do they have to kind of commit to do this?
I ask my guys, to look at something on an annual basis. If I can go in, right after the national buys occur in October of the prior year, you get the stations then all of a sudden are looking at a huge inventory gap. It happens every year, and they're looking at that inventory gap in November, early December, as they're staring down first quarter. Second quarter is the one that scares the hell out of them. So if you're able to go ahead and buy in at that point and lock something, and not technically lock it in, but you're able to go ahead and buy an annual ad program, you'll also get a significant amount of added value. And those are the things that you negotiate for special promotions. We have a lot of cross-promotion with our social media team to go ahead and buy into a special promotion. For example, if you wanted to do a giveaway to, somebody that's needy in your community, or those kinds of things. If you roll that in as a station promotion, and the station gets a plug, you get a plug, then you've got more media money that will have a greater reach into the marketplace and a greater impact. You can negotiate those kinds of very impactful programs if you're doing that in an annual basis. Now, you still have a two-week right to cancel, and you build that kind of a long-term relationship. But boy, I wouldn't go in it to test it. Test the waters. You either trust the folks that you're working with, and you go ahead and make that kind of commitment. You can see the value, and you can track it based on the tracking that you have in place, or you don't, because you can waste a whole lot of money dipping your toe in an expensive medium, especially with broadcast television.
Well, we were kind of coming up on the end of this. I think you and I could talk about this, and we do sometimes for hours, and we will again at this year's MirrorScore conference. But for the contractors who want to explore if mass media is right for them, how do they get a hold of you to have that conversation? Which way would you like them to get a hold of you to see that number
sure.
on your screen?
Yep, and we would be happy in those cases the first thing we would do is find out what your goals are, your size, what you're trying to accomplish, and then, we would do a media review of that marketplace to find out, where the efficiencies lie between broadcast, cable, and radio, as well as some of the new media that's out with OTT called over the top. Your digital space and video that's happening there. And you can reach us online at cornerstonead.com, or you can give us a call. We're at 317-804-5640. And again, my handle is Tracy P. and you can catch me there either through email, or you can catch me on LinkedIn or otherwise.
Tracy, we appreciate you sharing your experience with our listeners. And for anyone who's listening and like a free market appraisal, along with our marketing efficiency and effectiveness rating, just let me know. Obviously, my information's on the screen right there. It's 314-368-6971. And the team at Cornerstone is really familiar with using that analysis to help do what they do better. So I just want to kind of appreciate you taking the time, and we'll be getting together soon, I guess, at our event in St. Louis. And I think, in fact, you're having lunch with Charlie today. He's over in Indianapolis, I believe. So
I am looking forward to it. I've been keeping an eye out for his text, and I look forward to seeing everybody at the MirrorScore conference as well.
All right, guys. Appreciate the time. And again, you've got the contact info on the screen, and look forward to talking again soon.
Take care.